Armin Faber's heartbeat pounded so hard it felt like it might burst through his chest. The roar of the wind outside was nothing compared to the rushing sound in his ears. His eyes darted across the dimming horizon, searching desperately for any sign of safety. Landing on enemy soil was out of the question. The thought alone was enough to send a cold shiver through him. He was not just flying any plane, he was piloting one of Germany's most closely guarded pieces of technology. A fighter so secret that its loss to the enemy could tilt the balance of the war. His Focke-Wulf 190 was faltering now, its engine coughing and sputtering like a wounded animal. The fuel gauge hovered near empty, a cruel reminder that the long dogfight he had just survived had taken its toll on both him and the machine. Ditching in the icy waters of the Channel was the last fate he wanted to face. The evening of June 23, 1942, was closing in fast, the summer twilight draining away quicker than he expected. Each passing second gnawed at him as the fuel needle sank lower and lower. His breathing grew shallow, his grip on the controls tighter. Then, through the fading light, the dark outline of a landing strip appeared in the distance. It was faint, almost hidden by the shadows, but it was there. With no time to hesitate, Faber lowered his altitude sharply, biting the stick as he aimed the fighter toward the narrow stretch of grass. The wheels hit the ground hard, bouncing slightly before settling into a rough roll. The engine gave one last coughing protest before falling silent. Relief washed over him in a sudden, dizzying wave. He had made it down in one piece. A figure was already running toward him across the field, the outline growing sharper as it drew closer. Faber's first thought was that help had arrived, but that illusion shattered in an instant. The man climbed onto the wing, his movement swift and sure, and leveled a pistol at Faber's head. In the gloom, the shape of the uniform came into focus, and his stomach dropped. These men were not Luftwaffe. At that moment in the war, the skies above Europe were a place of constant danger. Britain's Royal Air Force, despite its skill and courage, held only a fragile advantage. The famous Supermarine Spitfires had long been the pride of British aviation, known for their unmatched agility and speed. For a time, they were the best the skies had to offer. But in August 1941, that advantage was ripped away with the sudden arrival of Germany's newest predator, the Focke-Wulf FW190. Its impact was immediate and devastating. Over the battlefields of occupied France, British pilots found themselves facing an aircraft that could outmaneuver them with ease, climb faster, and strike harder. Powered by the BMW 801 radial engine, the FW190 had both speed and stability, giving it an edge in every engagement at low to medium altitudes. It could twist through the air like a blade, responding to its pilot's touch with deadly precision. British airmen returned from combat pale and shaken, describing encounters with an enemy fighter that seemed to anticipate their every move. In London, the mood inside the intelligence community was growing grim. The FW190's performance had rattled Britain's confidence in its ability to control the skies. Every arm of the war machine, from the codebreakers and spies to the analysts of air combat, turned its attention to this new threat. The objective was clear and urgent: find a way to get one of these fighters intact, to study it, understand it, and learn how to beat it. Germany knew this as well as the British did. Berlin's high command was fully aware that their new fighters' secrets were as valuable as any weapon on the battlefield. Orders from the top were unyielding. Hermann Göring himself issued a command forbidding any mission that might risk an FW190 being captured. Pilots were reminded in no uncertain terms that losing one could give the enemy the very tool they needed to take back control of the air. But desperation often fuels daring ideas, and Britain's need for an intact FW190 led to one of the boldest schemes of the war. Squadron leader Paul Ritchie, a decorated fighter ace with a reputation for bold, sometimes outrageous plans, came forward with a proposal. His idea was as risky as it was ingenious. An RAF pilot, fluent in German and dressed in an impeccable Luftwaffe uniform, would fly a captured Messerschmitt fighter across the Channel into occupied France. Upon landing at a Luftwaffe base known to house FW190s, the pilot would claim that his aircraft had been badly damaged in combat. He would play the part of a frantic German officer, barking orders in perfect German, and demand a fresh fighter immediately to meet a fictitious Allied air raid. If the ruse worked, the British would have exactly what they needed: a pristine FW190, ready to be flown back across enemy lines. If fortune was on their side, the startled Luftwaffe ground crews would drop whatever they were doing and rush to help what they believed was a high-ranking officer in urgent need. In their eagerness to serve, they would never suspect they were handing over access to one of Germany's most prized possessions. The imposter, acting every bit the part of an authoritative colonel, would climb into the cockpit of an FW190, throttle up, and vanish into the clouds. Within minutes, he would be heading back across the Channel, carrying with him not just the aircraft, but the technological secrets the Reich had fought so hard to protect. It was a plan daring enough to seem like something from a spy novel, but it never had the chance to be carried out. Before it could be set into motion, fate intervened. By the summer of 1942, Oberleutnant Armin Faber occupied a respected but largely administrative post as adjutant to the commander of the 3rd Group of WW2, based at Morlaix in Brittany. For a man whose identity had been forged in the adrenaline and danger of combat flying, the piles of paperwork, endless schedules, and routine of headquarters life felt suffocating. His eyes would often drift from the desk to the skies outside, longing for the roar of an engine and the rush of a dogfight. On June 23rd, the chance he had been waiting for finally appeared. A combat mission was forming, and Faber secured permission to join it. He would be flying one of the fearsome new Focke-Wulf FW-190s, a machine that had earned a reputation as a predator of the air. His companions on this mission were the seasoned warriors of 7th Staffel, men who lived for the thrill of the hunt. That afternoon, the alarm came in. A dozen RAF Boston bombers had been spotted returning from a raid. They were not alone. 3 squadrons of fighters from the Hornchurch Wing flew close. Escort, these were squadrons 310, 312, and 313, flown by skilled and battle-tested Czechoslovak pilots whose reputation for determination and ferocity preceded them. They were under the command of Alois WW2, a respected ace whose name carried weight among friend and foe alike. Over the channel, the two forces closed in on each other with lethal speed. The calm expanse of sky erupted into chaos in seconds. Engines roared like thunder, the air shaking with their power. Machine guns and cannons opened fire, stitching the sky with arcs of tracer fire so bright they seared the eyes. The FW-190 drove into the battle with devastating force, their heavy armament and exceptional maneuverability allowing them to slice through the first line of defense. But the Czech pilots were not easily broken. They twisted and climbed, rolling into counterattacks. With unshakable resolve, in the middle of this storm, one deadly encounter unfolded. WW2 locked eyes on his target and committed to the attack. The German pilot he faced refused to yield. Each of them locked on a direct collision course. Neither wavered. In the final instant, the two aircraft met with a blinding flash, tearing apart in a burst of fire and twisted metal. Both planes were gone before they even struck the waves below. When the sky finally began to clear, the Germans claimed to have destroyed 7 Spitfires in exchange for 2 FW-190s, one in the fatal collision, and another that was about to disappear in circumstances stranger than anything they could have imagined. Despite the losses, the RAF pilots pressed the fight with undiminished courage. In the chaotic aftermath, Faber realized he had become separated from his formation. Now alone, his situation worsened when one of his cannons jammed, leaving him at a serious disadvantage. Sergeant František, Traitner of 310 Squadron, spotted the isolated FW-190 and instantly moved to attack. His Spitfire slipped into position behind the German fighter, and the chase began. They tore across the skies over the Devon countryside, twisting, diving, and climbing in a deadly dance. The sun caught on the gleam of the Spitfire's wings as Traitner closed in, bursts of tracer fire slicing past Faber's canopy. Sweat ran into Faber's eyes as he wrestled the controls, desperate to shake the hunter behind him. Traitner's aim was closing in, the moment of the kill only seconds away. Then Faber made his move. With a sharp pull on the stick, he sent his FW-190 into a sudden immelment turn, climbing hard and forcing his body into crushing G-forces that narrowed his vision to a dark tunnel. At the peak of the maneuver, he rolled inverted, then leveled out. The reversal had worked. The Spitfire now lay in his sights, caught in a vulnerable position. Faber wasted no time. Diving straight into the attack, he fired his only working cannon. The rounds found their mark, smashing into Traitner's aircraft with a brutal impact. The Spitfire jerked violently, its frame shuddering under the impact before a thick trail of smoke poured from its tail. A heartbeat later, the aircraft erupted in a bright burst of flame. Traitner reacted instantly, throwing himself clear just as the fire consumed the fighter, his parachute billowing open in time to slow his fall. Above him, Faber pulled his FW-190 into a climb, his pulse racing, eyes fixed on the small white canopy drifting gently down toward the water. For a fleeting moment, he believed the fight was over and victory was his. He could not yet imagine how quickly his triumph would unravel. His bold evasive maneuvers had been spectacular, but they came at a heavy price. The twisting turns, the sharp climbs, and the aggressive dives had drained his fuel tanks to the point of desperation. Worse still, the frantic flying had left him disoriented. In his mind, the battle had ended over the English Channel, and his heading was taking him back toward the safety of occupied France. In reality, his sense of direction had betrayed him. Without realizing it, he had crossed the Bristol Channel instead, flying deeper into enemy territory with every passing minute. The fading light of evening pressed in on him, and the fuel gauge hovered at the edge of empty bin. Through the dim haze, he spotted what appeared to be salvation, a small airfield stretching across the ground ahead. Relief flooded through him. In his exhausted and confused state, he was certain he was looking at French soil. He lowered his altitude, lined up with the runway, and touched down. The landing was smooth. the wheels bumping over the ground before the aircraft rolled to a stop. On the tarmac of RAF Pembrey, heads turned instantly. The shape of the incoming aircraft was unmistakably a German fighter. Sergeant Jeff, standing nearby, froze for only a fraction of a second. His instincts kicked in, and he masked any reaction that might betray alarm. Raising his arm, he signaled calmly for the plane to taxi forward, hiding the fact that every man on the airfield had just realized a Luftwaffe fighter was landing in their midst. As soon as the aircraft halted, Jeff climbed onto its wing in a swift, fluid movement, and his hand was not a pistol or rifle. None were at hand in the training environment, but a flare gun. The closest thing to a weapon he could grab. He aimed it squarely at the German pilot. Faber, still drenched in adrenaline and fatigue, barely processed the gesture. His mind was still clouded with the certainty that he was among his own. But then other figures appeared, their blue uniforms standing out starkly in the fading light. The words they shouted carried sharp English consonants. The reality struck him with crushing force. He had not landed in France. He was in the heart of enemy territory. Within minutes, Faber was removed from his cockpit and placed under armed guard. The orders were swift. He was to be transported immediately to RAF Fairwood Common. Group Captain David Ackerley himself took charge of the transfer, his revolver never lowering from its mark during the journey. The silence inside the vehicle was thick and suffocating. Every jolt in the road seemed to echo the finality of what had happened. There was no undoing this mistake. By the time the truth had fully sunk in, it was beyond repair. Britain now possessed an intact Focke-Wulf 190, delivered right into their hands without a single shot fired at it. For the Luftwaffe, this was a disaster of the highest order. For the Allies, it was a prize beyond measure. The fighter was quickly repainted in RAF markings and given the designation MP449, making it the first complete, fully functional FW1902 fall into Allied possession. Without wasting a moment, engineers began dismantling it piece by piece, not to destroy it, but to record, measure, and understand it. For the first time, they could study every inch of the aircraft that had been cutting down their best pilots. The honor of flying the machine to the testing grounds was offered to Group Captain Hugh Williams, a man famous for his skill in piloting enemy aircraft. But Williams refused. The risk was too great. One accident could erase this once-in-a-war opportunity. Instead, the FW190 was carefully taken apart, loaded onto trucks, and transported to Farnborough, where it was rebuilt. In July 1942, MP once again took to the skies, this time with British test pilots at the controls. They pushed it to its limits, gauging its speed, agility, and responsiveness. The results confirmed what many pilots had already feared: it was an incredibly fast, nimble, and lethal machine in skilled hands. From Farnborough, the fighter was sent to Duxford's Airfighting Development Unit for a more direct test mock dogfights against the Spitfire Mark IX. These encounters revealed the aircraft's strengths, but also a key vulnerability. At higher altitudes, its performance faltered noticeably, a flaw that was quickly incorporated into new RAF tactics. MP449 was then assigned to No. 1426 Flight, nicknamed the Raffwaffe, a special unit tasked with flying captured German aircraft, to understand and counter them. Within months, 3 more FW190s each, lost by German pilots who had made similar navigational mistakes, joined its ranks. Together, these aircraft provided the RAF with priceless knowledge that reshaped their approach to air combat. The strategic edge gained from Faber's error was immense. It allowed British pilots to face the FW190 with a better understanding of its capabilities and weaknesses, saving countless lives in the process. By late 1943, MP449's work was done. It was dismantled for a more detailed study, and its engine continued to yield valuable information until the war's end. For Faber, the consequences were personal and unending. The weight of his mistake followed him into captivity, where he endured the monotony and frustration of life behind barbed wire in Canada. He made several attempts to escape, but none succeeded. Each day served as a reminder of that moment of disorientation in the sky, moment that had handed his enemies exactly what they needed to tip the balance of power in the air. In the vast scope of the Second World War, single moments often decided the fate of battles, and sometimes even shaped the course of the conflict. What happened on that June day in 1942 was not the result of grand strategy or calculated espionage. It was the product of one man's disorientation, a small error in navigation that spiraled into one of the Allies' greatest intelligence windfalls. Faber's flight, meant to bring destruction to enemy skies, instead delivered one of Germany's most feared fighters intact into British hands. That machine became a teacher, revealing its strengths and its limits, allowing Allied pilots to turn fear into understanding, and understanding into victory. For Faber, it was a lifetime burden. For the RAF, it was a gift they could never have imagined. In war, the line between triumph and disaster can be as thin as a turn of the compass, and in this case, the wrong turn changed everything.